All right, Trog, welcome to Porch Beers. Thanks for being here. We got a couple good questions lined up for you, hopefully. We'll hit the microeconomics personal finance question first, something that's really hopefully relevant to all of us as individuals. And then we'll do a bigger picture question about global economy, you know, big populations, countries using money, and et cetera. But let's get down to business first. What are you drinking today?
Well, it's good to see you, Brett. I have another beer from Full Steam, which is a local brewery. This is
Nice.
a Pacific Northwest style IPA. Given that you're in
Okay.
Portland, I thought I
Yeah.
would bring this one. It's called The Road to Nowhere.
So in my experience with the Pacific Northwest IPAs is we're looking at probably like an 11, 12% alcohol content. Is that right?
Ooh, well, I was gonna guess more like 7. I'll look while
Okay.
you're. Here we go. 6.6. This is
Oh, okay.
lightweight.
We're good.
Yeah,
We're good.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a light beer. You know, these damp, cool winters up here, we need a little help. So I'm going to start with this is my favorite kind of everyday beer, Lagunitas, Northern Cal. I spent a good chunk of my life living in San Francisco, and Lagunitas is celebrated the way the Giants are, the 49ers and the Warriors are. It's one of the great NorCal beers. Little something. It's an IPA. It's a nice little daily. It's a little bit heavier on the alcohol content while we're on that topic, but they do several great beers, and a little something for my money is a good daily or semi-daily, depending on how rough the work week has been, how the political and economic situation in our country is.
Yeah, if double-digit ABV is your benchmark, then
It's not double-digit, but it is. It relieves a little stress at the first sip. All right, so let's get down to business. We're going to start with, like I said, the personal finance conversation. When is a moment when you have been particularly stressed about a decision impacting your own finances? How did you navigate that stress and decision-making process? And looking back on it, how would you have made some edits, knowing how things went in one direction or the other?
that's a
And
good
I
question.
say this not as a leading question, but as somebody who has navigated some financial ups and downs as an entrepreneur. I've had some sleepless nights. I've wondered, how should I proceed? How shouldn't I proceed? And then I look back on things and have mixed emotions about certain directions. I've been proud of my decision-making skills in some cases. I've been disappointed in my decision-making skills in some cases. So I'm curious, as somebody with an unemotional approach to money, what are some of those moments where you've been like, okay, let's take this jump, let's try it, or how am I going to figure this out?
Yeah, so let's see. So there was when we came back from Australia, we actually came back without jobs, and so we were sort of looking for jobs, trying to find something in the research triangle. Um, Once we got those, it was at that point kind of open ended. So we thought, well, maybe we'll start looking for a house. And that's definitely the biggest purchase I've ever made. And so just trying to figure out like what our budget was and not getting. If anyone's ever shopped for a house, it's really easy to you set a budget and then the agent starts showing you, well, you could get a little more if you just bump it up a little bit, and then you start seeing those houses and you fall in love with those. And so managing that process, hadn't even really
Managing the
started the job
emotional,
yet. Yeah.
managing the emotional component is exactly my point. Exactly my point. So,
Yeah.
so how did, I just to have a little bit of background, you got your PhD from Duke. You had an opportunity to work abroad in Australia for about 2 years.
Hmm.
Um, After that point, you came back. You were ready to come back to the United States. You and your partner didn't have any jobs. You came back to the Durham area where you had studied.
Yep.
Start looking for a job. Landed a job, and then said, "Okay, let's figure out the next step
Yeah.
of our life together." Um, Buying a house, no argument there. I think for the majority of us is a significant commitment. It's a stressful commitment, and it is one of the times, like I said earlier, like the emotional side of me turns on and off, perhaps in the entrepreneur space very easily, or turns on, I should say, very easily. In this case, it's probably across the board where you're like, okay, I have X amount of money in my budget to buy a house. And then your partner says, well, I want to be sure we have this component. And you say, well, I want to be sure we have this component, or I want to be sure we're in this school district, or I want to be sure that we're in, this vicinity to, downtown or work or something like that, or family or friends. As you walk through that process, were you able to get exactly what you wanted, or were you able to navigate the different pushes and pulls in that experience in a way that you're comfortable with? And if not, how would you have perhaps addressed it differently?
Yeah, I think ultimately we ended up with what we wanted. I mean, we're actually still in the same house close to 15 years later. So in retrospect, I think it was a good decision. But it was a roller coaster. There was at least one house we kind of fell in love with, and ended up having some structural issues. And so we were ready to make the offer. We got the inspections, and I think my partner asked a really good question to one of the inspectors, because like I said, we kind of decided this was the place. And she asked him, well, if I was your daughter, what would you tell me to do? And I liked the framing of that. Like it kind of forced a little bit of outside perspective, even from him. And when he said walk away, we said, okay, so, but I think along the way, we saw houses that needed fixing up. We saw houses that were relatively new. And so I think we shopped enough that I think we kind of worked our way into the things that were important to us. And then kind of, again, right at the end, this was back before the financial crisis. So banks were giving out plenty of money, but it turned out because I didn't have I had an offer, but no paycheck yet. That the loan was actually in question for a little bit. And so they were like, well, let's just run it with your spouses. And nothing changed. Like our income cut in half, and they didn't change anything about the loan, which I thought was weird at the time. And then of course we realized later, like that was probably too much of that going on. So,
this is pre-2008 when the mortgage industry was a little fast and loose with following safe guidelines for lending.
Right.
Yeah.
So they were willing to give us the exact same loan at half the income. But at any rate, like I said, everything's worked out fine, and we're actually still in the house and still like it. So
awesome. That's great. I appreciate that. That's something that at the end of the day, like we're all going to go through, whether we believe it or not, we're all going to go through some tough financial moments that are going to keep us up. We're going to wonder what happens if, or, where do I turn if I need to turn? So I appreciate the candid response on that. I know sometimes we dig a little deeper on Porch Beers, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of value in the way that you've navigated your financial life and your career path and all that. So I appreciate the intel. With that, I'm going to take a little sip of my beverage. I'm starting to get a little nervous thinking about big purchases and interest payments. Okay, the macro question. Explain to me how the unemployment rate is calculated and what potential flaws or holes are in it, and what level makes you reach a certain amount of uncomfortableness in the economy or in the country.
Okay, great question. So the unemployment rate is a ratio. So on the bottom, it's everyone that's either employed or looking to be employed. And on the top, it's everyone that's employed. So basically, if everyone that wants to have a job and is actively looking, how many of those people have a job or don't have a job? So the unemployment rate, I guess, would be that don't have a job. So typically, economists would say, there's been a debate about this recently, but what we would call full employment would be an unemployment rate of 4% or so, meaning that 96% of people that want a job have one.
Okay. Is that a level where you're uncomfortable, or is that a level of like, that's kind
No,
of,
that's what we'd love to have.
that's where you want to get? Okay. So
Yeah.
if unemployment falls to 4% or a little bit lower, then you're feeling like we have a healthy workforce, so to speak.
That's right. And it'll never get to zero, because there's always a certain amount of churn. There's new people coming into the labor market. There's people trying to switch careers or switch jobs.
Right.
So it won't be zero. Now when does it get concerning? I mean, just for some points of reference, like kind of the worst it's ever been was during the Great Depression, and it was like 20 to 25%. In the Great Recession in 2009-10, I think it got up to like close to 10%, 9 to 10%. And those numbers are real bad. So we start getting concerned if it starts getting up into that, 6, 7, 8. We're probably thinking about a recession at that point. And if it goes above that, we're in big recession/depression area.
So as the unemployment rate walks its way up to say 7, 8%, what's the domino effect forward in the economy or in the country? What happens next when you say recession, or when you say I start to get worried?
Yeah. So, on the supply side, it means that employers aren't hiring as many people. And so either they're concerned about their current operating status, or they're concerned about the future. And then on the demand side, if people don't have as much work, then they don't have as much money to spend. And so it can turn into a little bit of a cycle where that soft demand then leads to companies worrying about being able to sell their stuff. And so they cut back their hiring. And so that's how you kind of get in one of these recessionary loops.
What happens then to re-stimulate the economy, if anything?
So most of our recessions can be stimulated if we boost that demand again. So you'll get government spending. Some of that goes to the corporate side, or they'll give money to people and let them spend it. So it can be tax cuts, it can be payroll tax cuts, it can be just literally checks sent to your house.
Stimulus checks.
Yeah. So when they say stimulus, what that means is they're trying to generate people spending money, generate demand, and then hopefully that'll create jobs that people can fill.
Awesome. That's something that in the best of times is a North Star that often comes up in the media or in political conversation. In the worst of times, it always comes up. It's something that all of us deal with, whether it's ourselves, our loved ones, our neighbors. I think when you get into that, as low as 6, 7% sounds, it's very much impactful to everyone. And it's very real to feel your, the stress of your company, perhaps making some changes, or the stress of actually being one of those folks that is unemployed at that time, trying to find a job. Right. So having a little clarity on that is very helpful. So I appreciate that. Great Sure. Conversation, good chat. Couple of deeper dives there. So thank you for opening up a little bit to us, and thank you for the opportunity to have a little beer with you too.
Yeah. Cheers, bro.
All right. Cheers. Have a good one.